Thank you. Almost forgot the clicker. All right, welcome to Balancing Our Processes and Automation in Groupon Center of Excellence. I'm going to go through with you on how we've enabled our governed server environment to keep everything locked down and running efficiently, while also augmenting our team and building new functionality so that our users can be more productive, and give you a blueprint on how to implement the same in your company. So can I get a raise of hands of who here manages the Tableau Server in their company? That's what I like to see. I was hoping for that. At least it's the right crowd. And how many of you have used the extensibility functionality, things like tab command or the REST API or extract SDK? A few more hands. So the rest of you will get a bit of a guide on how to go about setting out, getting that and playing around and doing a lot more. And I need to make sure that I'm not standing in front of the screen. So I'm Mark Kernke. I'm the head of data visualization at Groupon. I joined the team in November 2016, just before Black Friday, and I inherited a whole lot from my predecessors with our Tableau Server environment. The system was crashing weekly. We had very, very large extracts to the tune of about 5 gigabytes, and if you guys were playing with those in the TDE days, that wasn't so much fun. There was consistency in our permission settings, there was multiple processes for the same things, and there was plenty of unhappy stakeholders. I personally moved from a different section of the business, and I was one of those unhappy stakeholders wanting to make a change, and given the opportunity, I definitely have. So I've worked at Groupon 4.5 years. I've managed our COE for 1.5 years now. And I also previously used to manage our display advertising on a global basis. So you might hear some references to some of our marketing team. It's where I know a whole lot more. And I even go through an example on that. Ooh, that was not where we were to go. So in data viz, in our center of excellence at Groupon, we try to make sure that everyone at Groupon has timely, accurate, and digestible data for making decisions regularly. There's a lot in that. Tableau enables us to do a lot of that, and there's a lot of skills that we need to bring to the table to ensure that we get the most out of the tools. So we make sure we simplify our processes, we've built out very clear communication, and we took ownership of our server and made sure that when there was a problem, we stood up and we claimed it was our fault so that we could go in and fix it. These were the starting points of where I got everything running and made sure that we got through our holiday period, where we see 3 times the amount of data come through on Black Friday and Cyber Monday than what we do in a normal day through the year. And needless to say, in the lead up to Christmas, it's a hell of a lot faster than when we're in a normal period of like summer. So in our setup, as I said, we have a very governed system. My team is the center of excellence at the top here, and our users are the bottom, our Tableau desktop users. We run 3 different servers. Our first one is our dev server, which only my team accesses. We use this for testing out the next version of Tableau Server and make sure that we have a whole test suite of workbooks and data sets, and everything's going to work fine. Sometimes there's drivers that we need to upgrade and things along those lines, and we can get ahead of that without planning. The next one is our staging server. This is where our analysts across the business can push their reports and see how it looks on the server, make sure to performance test it, make sure that they get sign-off from their stakeholders and everything working correctly. But that's the only location that they're allowed to push. My team then takes the workbooks from there, and we do a bunch of performance testing before we move it into our production system. This way we make sure that our production system is running efficiently and effectively for everyone in the company to be able to get the reports that they need. There's a bunch of different criteria, and I'll go through those a little bit later, but this is our setup. Now, our COE is rather small. We're 6 people in total. We support 355 Tableau desktop licenses. And finally, they create reports for the 6,000 employees that have access to our Tableau server at Groupon. It's a logistical mess sometimes, trying to get the communication out, trying to roll out a new process. And it becomes very complex as most of those analytics teams are in groups of no greater than 10 people. There are many cases where it's an individual analyst that's sitting in a functional team by themselves, helping out the business and doing some great work, but not getting all the support they need or not being able to be as efficient with their time because they're doing multiple different parts of their role. And so my team is in there trying to enable our analysts to be more effective with their time, to be able to do more for the business and get faster speed to insight. So data at Groupon is very wide and varied. As I said, no team is greater than 10, but there's 350 of them. So what do they all do? Let me take you through our recent UK TV advert to show a few examples, and we'll run through the data that's actually being displayed in the ad.
Kids don't have school today, save at the matinee. Done cleaning the garage, schedule hot stone massage. Game cancelled, kids are sad, let's all go bowl instead. Dishes have not been done, burgers for everyone. You'll save on lots of stuff, using Groupon to save. Now you'll have less to pay on things you do every day.
Download the free app and save. Groupon.
So within that ad, you saw the mobile app appear multiple times. You saw a bunch of different deals that family bought. There was searching. There was looking through our deal catalog at every different deal that we have to offer. There was location services to understand where the person was relative to where our merchants are for where they can redeem those vouchers. There was page views that we're taking and trying to get consistency between our mobile apps and our desktop site. We had site performance metrics also working in the background, making sure that there weren't errors appearing, making sure that everyone got a timely response so that they could continue and work through the purchase funnel. We had user-generated content. There was Q&A sections, as well as we collect customer satisfaction scores, so we know which deals to push more and which ones to pull back on and work with the merchants. We had purchases being taken place, and there's a lot of data around a transaction, far more than you'd expect. Marketing attribution about which channels got the download. We saw the buttons in the TV advert, and actually in that case, we do a very complex analysis to understand the indirect impact that our TV adverts are having upon the number of downloads in our app and the number of purchases. We have an A/B testing platform, which we've built ourselves, and there's some great dashboards for understanding the statistical uplift that we're seeing across many different tests that are all running simultaneously. And finally, there was logistics. We didn't actually show any goods in that TV advert, but we work with drop shippers to be able to move goods direct from the manufacturer to the customer, as well as run our own warehouses and try to optimize the price of shipping and purchase. And there's a whole lot of fun in that section as well. But needless to say, our data teams at Groupon have many different distinct areas, and those analysts need to be able to focus and be productive where they are, but the teams don't need to be huge in size. They need to be very functional. So as we go back to that highly governed model, there was a bunch of pains across the business. And my team, especially, was one of the loudest complainers back before I joined the Center of Excellence. We used to use tab command quite a lot. We used to extend out the functionality as much as we could so that we got data as timely as possible to make decisions. So the team, when I took it over, were dealing with a number of extract refreshes that were happening. There was many times that we had to rerun an extract, or we had people complaining that they didn't have their data. So there was, in many cases, no updates on the data because the ETL pipeline ran after the refresh ran. Trying to get those timings can be tricky. There was many cases where there was missing data, that the ETL was currently running and it had deleted the data as it was inserting more into the database. and the extract ran, and suddenly people are without data to even make decisions on yesterday's information. There was late data because we were running multiple refresh cycles throughout the day to make sure that we got it as soon as possible, or when we normally expect it, or the TP99, 99% of the time it arrives by a certain stage late in the afternoon. But we had many people also complaining that they were only getting their data at 4 p.m. when they needed to leave at 5. They couldn't really use the data and be effective in their day job because it wasn't timely enough. And then lastly, when we had multiple refreshes happening and we have information like transaction information that gives us some historical backfill that we need to do, we do full data loads. And that meant that there was a tremendous amount of resource usage in our backgrounders on our Tableau server and also within our database. Our DBAs weren't happy with me, but we'll go into that another time. So this was the problem. Fortunately, there were solutions that had been written around the internet, and we could leverage the Tableau community and all of the insights that they had. So we built a new service that sat in the middle. We called this our Extract API. The way that we started off for this was that we just allocated our engineering resources. We defined a clear scope. We literally took some of those great blog posts out there about how the Extract SDK was being used, and we defined a very simple proof of concept. Our proof of concept we built during an internal hackathon. We're lucky enough that we're part of our engineering team, our software development team. And twice a year, we have a week where we work on new projects that can push forward the momentum of our engineering at Groupon. So we built our proof of concept to a very defined scope. We chose one particular use case where the loudest customers were, and we built upon that. We then iterated. We built feature after feature, involving another person into the mix to give us another recommendation for their use case. We started off with only a Teradata driver, but we extended that to MySQL and we extended that to Hadoop. We had to build in extra functionality to make sure that people got the error messages and understood what was happening in the service, that they were able to kick it off from different ETL systems. There was a whole lot of little work that we couldn't have scoped out first off. But as we brought people in and we listened for feedback, there was plenty more functionality that we could put in. And finally, we measured our success. This was great for us. We knew that in my old team, if we got data 1 hour earlier, we could save the company $70,000 a year. Suddenly, all that work paid for itself. And we had an engineer that a lot of his time just on that one use case was able to be balanced out between his salary and the money that the company made. So it was great. We had our Extract SDK working well with connections to our database, and that system is using resources on a separate server that's not interrupting our backgrounders to be able to refresh and be able to store that and be able to make our whole life a whole lot easier before it publishes to our Tableau server. There is a lot of logistics underneath, and we can go through that at a separate time, but this is the core components to be able to do the same. Next up was that we had an engineer now, and 3 months into the job, I got asked to evaluate, could we reduce our BI tool set down to 1? We were also using MicroStrategy at the time, and anyone who was trying to ever remove a BI tool knows the pain of the users coming up and saying, but what about this feature? I use this one feature all the time. And it's that one person that is a very small part of the business, but becomes an extreme blocker to be able to get it done. Much of the functionality we were able to move across. We were able to take a Tableau-esque approach to solving those particular problems because we asked for the business cases. But there was one technical limitation that we couldn't get around. Has anyone tried to use the email subscriptions in Tableau and tried to extend that for email batching? it's really difficult. Trying to be able to send to email distribution lists, trying to be able to reuse the same information multiple times for multiple users so that you're not taking too many of the system resources. Try to even break that up so that we can reuse the same dashboard multiple times with just different parameters for the different users. In one of our main cases, we look at the performance, the daily performance of the company. We need to have this at least 3 different levels. One is our global overall statement, and those execs also need to understand the regional breakouts and the country breakouts. Then for regional managers, they just need to know about their regional performance as well as the individual countries. And then our country managers just need to understand their countries. We don't want to give them too much information and create too much noise. So this was really easy in MicroStrategy. I had some great MicroStrategy devs that built on that tool for years. But in Tableau, we were lacking a bit of functionality. But luckily, we had an engineering resource. We were already using some of the extensibility functionality. There were a couple of ideas that we could piece together. So we built a proof of concept. This is extremely basic. We're filling in which views that we want to select. We list out the email addresses that we want to send it to, and we provide the filters. It worked. It worked for our team. It wasn't something that was pretty that we could share, but we got there. We were able to show that there was potential so that in 6 months' time, we could iterate upon this and get it stable and working, and be a whole lot more for the company to move away from MicroStrategy. So we iterated the same process as before. We built out functionality to simplify the process, to either be able to select everything to be all in one encompassing, or if we wanted to select individual views for individual users, depending on which way we wanted to split out the emails. One packaged all together, or multiple use cases at multiple different levels. We had multiple page layouts. Some reports look great in portrait, some look great in landscape. In the US, they use a letter format standard, while over here we use A4. There's a whole lot to do with PDFs versus embedding images. We needed to have this nuance so that we could enable everything to move across and be as effective as possible. And we needed to do it better than what we had in the previous tool to make people want to use it. On top of this, we then added functionality that was more for our users. So we enforced that only at Groupon.com emails were going to be able to subscribe. This way we knew our reports, our sensitive data wasn't going outside of the company just because it was possible to do. So we built that functionality in and we do that check. We built previewing so that as the person was building it, they could go and have a look at that dashboard directly with the filters applied and make sure that they got all the workings and mechanics going correctly. And lastly, we built common testing actions. So you want to be able to save. You want to be able to run it and show your end users all the different use cases and get feedback. You don't want to run it all the time, and so you want to be able to kick it off manually. Sometimes when your ETL process hasn't worked right, you also want to be able to kick it off manually, so that backup functionality is there for them to come back to. And there's also save and run, because sometimes you want to do both. So that was really good. It saved us a bunch in licensing because now we have one tool and we have consistency with our data sources and where people go and look for data. Lastly, there's one more tool that I want to show you. And this is one that we're still in a little bit of iteration on, but we're already seeing the successes. As I talked about in some of my earlier slides, my COE is rather small. With 6 people, there's 355 analysts. We keep a highly governed server. We're the ones that move it. So there's not enough hours in the day. We were dedicating 1 day per week per person on my team to just moving those dashboards from staging to production. We did a whole lot of great performance checks, but those were just a defined list that people were working through each and every case. We only were able to do this 3 times a week. We had to be able to focus on project work as well. And then lastly, when some of our analysts were in India, but it was the person on call was on the west coast of the US, there was no overlap in time zone. So if there was a minor change that was needed for one of our checks, it then had to wait until the next refresh cycle. And that meant another 48-hour delay. So needless to say, our stakeholders were a little bit annoyed with us. So to go ahead and build this, again, we had resource in the room, in our team. We had a very clear and defined process about what is being done at the moment. And so we could start building a proof of concept. The tool that we built, we allow for all publishing from our staging environment to our production environment. This reduces the workload in our center of excellence. This means that it's always available for our analysts. We have consistency in the qualitative checks. You don't know how many times there was something that was missed because the analyst was rushing through or trying to do 2 jobs at once. And they thought that they did a check, but they did it on a different workbook. And so we want to make sure that our production system is running absolutely optimally. And so now we have consistency, and now we even have measurement over whose checks consistently fail, whether it be the performance of the bootstrap time, that initial load, trying to make sure that it's under 10 seconds, whether it be that they're using custom SQL and trying to sneak that by us. We want to make sure that the data is materialized in the database so that it's as fast as possible for Tableau to take it. We make sure that there's an info page so that there's contact information because they're not the ones publishing, so it's not going to be their name in the author field. Make sure that there's no blending, that that's only done by exceptions because there's only a limited number of CPUs. We can move that to the ETL where there's a whole lot more CPU in the database. And a few other little checks that we do that are a bit more Groupon-esque. And lastly, we maintain our governance by only doing this for republishing. Any of our users can only try to republish. If that dashboard exists already in our production environment, they're able to overwrite it. But when it comes to new publishing, we keep those checks ourselves and make sure that it's a quality dashboard and that we can give extra feedback on what they can do to be more effective for their end users. My team's time can now be spent on far more productive conversations so that our analysts are more enabled and able to move along with their training, with their understanding of the tool, with the understanding of their users, and try to reduce the duplication in our server. We also make sure that we can uncheck any of the system checks, the performance checks that we have, if we need to make an exception. There's always, although the rules are there for 80% of the cases, there's plenty of cases where we need to enable data blending, for example, because that is the best option in that use case. We want to make sure that our team still is able to do everything nice and quick, but able to uncheck that box. So this is all well and good that we had each one of those use cases defined and measured, and we know the success, but there was a whole lot of indirect success that we had. We were able to have highly engaged stakeholders now. They understand that we're trying to do the best for them, and they're coming and talking with us and trying to know more, or trying to get on our beta programs so that they can test out the new functionality that we're going to deliver. We have reduced staff turnover in my team in the Center of Excellence because they're not doing that boring ad hoc work day in and day out. They're able to work on their projects and see things in a bigger picture. We have lower staff costs overall for the company because our analysts are more effective with their time. And also our end users are able to get their data sooner. We have lower costs in our licensing and our databases because we're using our resources correctly. And lastly, we have very detailed measurement over usage in every single tool that we build. What are the little errors that they're having? Who's using which functionality? Which team do we need to go after? Who's using it too much, that they're obviously doing something that's not right, or their processes are broken? So we can go in and consult with that team on a different level and have a very different conversation than what we would have before. So how can you do this? How can you do the same in your business? Well, there's 4 steps that I want you to remember. You need to allocate the resources, make sure that you have clear scope. You need to build a proof of concept. You then need to iterate. And finally, you need to measure success. So when you're using the Tableau APIs and extension functionality, you want to remember the APIs. So let me go into those a little bit more. Allocating resources is creating a plan, making sure that you have very defined scope about what you're wanting to achieve. If you go in there with a blank slate and you have a rough idea of the problem, you're not going to stop building features. You're not going to have a target audience. It's the same as building a dashboard. You want to get clear sign-off from executives, both within your team for making sure that you have the buy-in that this is a tool that you can go on and maintain into the future, but sign off externally from other stakeholders that they're very interested in using this and will partner with you. And then you want to make sure that you have the skill set within your team to take advantage of this. A lot of the blog posts throughout the Tableau community talk about this in Java and in Python, and both those skills we have in our team, and we've made sure to upskill our engineers on how to use those effectively. Next up is proof of concept. So make sure that you seek advice in the Tableau community. Don't be sitting by yourself. Read the blog posts, reach out to the writers, reach out to other managers of COEs that are doing some of this great work. As before, there was a few different hands up at the beginning talking about people that have used extensibility functionality. Those are your peers now. Go and rack their brains. Then build a minimum viable product. What I mean by that is not trying to just make something work, but make a production use case work. Get that value today so that those people can be your advocates to continue on this new tool that you're building. And lastly, work with someone who actually provides feedback. We ran into this case a few times where we built functionality for someone and it took 3 months before we got them to be able to use it. So work with someone and rotate out those people that don't give feedback and give priority as testers to those that do. This helps you move significantly faster for the next section of iteration. So release early, release often, gather feedback on missing functionality, make sure you test your stability. This is a big part because you're going to be maintaining this tool for a long time into the future. It's going to be embedded within the culture and the production fabric of your business. You want to incorporate business standards by default, like we did with the email addresses in our subscription tool. This way, then, your users don't need to think about doing that correctly each and every time. And lastly, you want to expose functionality for best practices to your users and keep extra functionality for yourself to bend those rules and work with those exceptions. And then lastly, you want to measure your success in each and every one of these cases. You want to measure your usage. You want to ask your users for their time saved so that they're even thinking about how valuable you are to their success. And then be honest about what can be better. Have a retrospective. Understand what you want to do better the next time you build a tool. So make sure you remember those APIs. Allocate the resources, build a proof of concept, iterate, and then measure success. Cool. Thank you very much. So Please also make sure that you're using the Tableau mobile app and that you give feedback on this session. The Tableau team definitely take that into account, and that feedback would be great. If you're going to give me a 3-star or a 2-star, please come up and talk with me rather than put it into the app. Just put the 5 stars in, it'll be good. All right, so I want to open it up for Q&A now. I'm sure that there's a few different questions here. Sure. There's a mic coming so that this can be, it saves me repeating the question again for the recording.
Maybe I missed it, but I didn't fetch it quite well. Why you are reducing licenses?
We're not reducing licenses. We reduced licenses in the way of our BI tools, which we had. We actually removed MicroStrategy. So we saved on those licenses.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, and this is meaning that with all the measurement that we're doing, we're also optimizing our license usage and making sure that we prioritize those people that are going to be most effective and enabling other functionality for other people to still get what they need. By making our analysts more productive with their time, there's been a number of people that only really require web edits now, that they can have that functionality and we can go work with another team of analysts so that they can have desktop licenses, and it's far more productive in that respect.
I like that approach.
Yeah, it's good.
Thank you for this session. I actually work for Tableau. I work for the Benelux team, and hence the orange shirt. See,
Yeah.
only orange I get to wear this World Cup. But I'm wondering, because I talk to customers like you every day, and I'm kind of wondering, what would you have liked to know beforehand, like from Tableau? Like, are there a couple of things that you can point out that we could help with when we talk to customers before they start their deployment?
I think that the biggest thing, there's two different parts to that by the sounds of it. There's before deployment of server, which I think that people need to just work with the use cases to get that built out. There's plenty of other talks and great people on how to get server being used. And there's a number of different use cases for just the functionality that's there, and that forms the bedrock in the business. But as for building upon that, replacing other BI tools, reducing other friction, understanding the different setups, that not every COE is the same, and that there are different options depending on how your organization works, is really useful. So it was because I'm rather active in the online community that I'm aware of a lot more. And conferences like this are a great way to also share that.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for that. You mentioned at the start when you took on the department that permissions for users were a challenge. Within the model that you described, who looks after permissions and how do you manage them?
Okay, my team does. So let me go back to that slide and I'll explain. Oh, it's way back. I've got a lot of slides, haven't I? Okay, this one. So permissions on our production server, everyone is an interactor. Apart from my team, we're server admins. We're the only ones that can publish or do anything. We run custom permissions on a lot of our site. We are changing some of the permissions to be publishers so that we can have a sandbox environment for our web edits to be able to save, but there's a whole lot of fun in how we set that up to make sure that's still locked down and still working. But for the most part, they're just interactors. On our staging server, there's site admins. There's a couple of those, and we keep each of those sites rather small and separated for their testing and QA purposes. And it's just a sandbox environment for the analysts to make sure that it works on server, that there's no difference between server and desktop, and that it's going to function everything correct, as well as get sign-off from stakeholders. They obviously, as site admins, can add and remove people and add the permissions around the workbooks. But on production, that's only my team. Sure. Oh, good. Thomas had a question as well, and then we can walk through this way.
Thank you, thank you. A quick question. So, I mean, this whole Tableau stuff is about, encouraging people to build new contents, be agile. But, cutting access from your production environment doesn't seem like a very agile solution. So, aren't your, one question, and the second is that if I would be your business user, I would stay on the staging forever. And I can have as many bad dashboards as I want, and nobody will try to teach me how to do my work. So how do you deal with those rebels like me?
So let me start with the second part of how do I keep on top of those people. We do a lot of monitoring over both of our servers. We heavily utilize our Postgres database and understand usage rates of refreshes of extracts, of views of dashboards, of how much publishing is being done, of how much download is being done. We have consistency in our reporting on both our production and our staging systems. Actually, we now made it that there's only one data source that has all of our server environments for the same metrics, serving up a single dashboard, so I know what's working, what's not, and where I need to optimize my week and go talk with people. And then we name out who those people are. So I go and I ping them as soon as I see the data, and I ask what they're doing and how we can actually help them be more effective. If I'm building functionality, I want to make sure that they have it to do their job, or they might not be aware of everything. And so I use that as a jumping off point to understand their pain and what we can be doing better. As for the first part of the potential of people wanting to live in staging, yeah, that's there. But they know that we wipe that server, that any content that's older than 3 weeks. So there's incentive to move. We make sure that there's less resources behind that server, so it's not going to scale anywhere near the same. It's a matter of making sure that our production system is up. And when we have an error on our staging server, it can be down for a couple of hours, and we'll work around that. We give a shorter notice of when we're going to be doing upgrades and downtime, because these people should be working in that kind of environment. It's a staging server for a reason. And I want to make sure that there is that little bit of pain and question so that people do the right thing and encourage. It's a matter of making sure that we support them and give them the functionality so that there's the carrots, but also a few sticks to get the laggards to move over.
Hi. So I've got a question around dashboard security. I suppose it's kind of linked into permissions. So we have workbooks where it's viewed by a number of different areas within National Grid. And we kind of want to lock some of that dashboard down so people from East area can only view East information, people from the North area can use North information. The issue we've got with that is kind of a growing list of permissions groups, and there's kind of more demand for that sort of functionality within the dashboard. So how do you get around that challenge where you're going to be managing a permissions groups or an ever-growing list of permissions groups for dashboards?
Yeah, so we use Active Directory groups so that this becomes a whole lot easier for managing. We're looking at ways now of hooking in with our HR systems so that we can automatically add people to the data that they should be having, and then they need to ask for exceptions to other data that they shouldn't necessarily be having as their job. We still publish how everything's built out so analysts can get inspired from each other, but there's a whole lot more in that regard, and I'm definitely not the best person for answering all of that. Your Tableau sales rep should be able to hook you into the right people and go very deep into your specific use cases, because as I said, every COE is different. There's a whole lot of different technologies around, and making sure that it works right for you is going to be really important.
Thank you.
Your second, Paul. Oh, good.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for that. It's a really interesting presentation. Just going back to the subscription email tool that you built, pretty innovative what you've done there. And I think I might be contacting you to steal that. But obviously, I think that kind of functionality should be in the tool itself. So how have you been working with Tableau to close feature gaps like that and take the product on?
So I'm talking with product managers and developers behind the extensibility functionality. So they've been very interested in all the work that we do and taking a lot of those ideas. It opens up different alphas and betas that we can test in to make sure that we get even more ideas and working ahead. But I think that it's a matter of getting it right for Tableau as for how that functionality should be brought in. And pushing, I think, as us as enterprise leaders to come together and make sure that we have a unified voice. But in this case, I was able to take it on ourselves and make it really work for Groupon. So there's functionality in this that I wouldn't expect Tableau to be implementing, such as locking down the email addresses. That I know that they're working on governance, but I think that that's extra functionality that might just be a bit beyond scope. There's a lot today of being able to sign up other individuals to be able to receive reports, but we need to extend it to distribution lists, and this can be a bit of a murky area of who should get data, and I can see some of the reasons why there's apprehension and trying to do it the Tableau way of getting the best feature set out there. But we should always align and go together to them on what we require.
Hi there, question here. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really interesting and good to see the methodology you have on governance. I have two questions, if that's okay. First one, if you were to scale down your operations to 10% of what you currently have, how would you maintain a similar kind of structure of governance? Or what would you keep? What's the most vital elements of that? And secondly, what's the best single thing you would found to keep stakeholders that are non-analysts engaged in the whole process?
Okay. Can I ask a question? On that first one, scaling it down to 10% of what I have, is that people in the COE?
That's everything. So money, people, everything. So just kind of the overall resource you could give to the entire analytics
So when
function.
it comes to money, the way that I think of it is we need to balance costs and revenue. If I can save costs within the business that they've been able to justify to have, then I should be able to mitigate it with my own costs as long as that's cheaper than their implementation, so their people or my people. So in that regard, I think that reducing it to 10% would be a goal for profitability, but isn't necessarily iteration to achieve that.
Sorry, just to add on my question. I mean, in terms of if you were a 10% of that size as an organisation, so I come from a size where we've got a team of 6 analysts and about 750 employees kind of worldwide. How would you try and maintain that process to a degree in a
Slightly
smaller
different.
company?
Perfect. I think that in those cases, you're still very limited in what you can do and how far you can push things. There's probably many different parts of your day job that you're following the same process over and over. And you might not need to build huge tools like we do at an enterprise level. You could be writing scripts for yourself to do this. Being able to tap into the REST APIs, to iterate over your workbooks, to do one particular action, to maintain the server, that's what we've built on our staging server to clean it up. And we tap into the Postgres database underneath to see the age of the workbooks. So those little things are still using the same extension features, but just in a capacity that really works for your day job, gets you familiar with it, gets you more used to the programming as well, and able to see the success. You just scale down what you require and how polished the end result needs to be.
Yeah, the second one was just, sorry, I've taken up loads of time, apologies, was what you would do to keep a non-analyst stakeholder engaged.
So it's talking about those, it's that success, it's measuring the success. Non-analysts normally care about making profit. Everyone in your company should be worried about making profit and people spending their time correctly. So everyone should be passionate about that. It's about distilling the story down of how it enables them to get insights faster and more effectively. Oh, one more question.
I'll throw a late one in.
Yep.
So at the very beginning, we were talking about kind of data sources and refreshing. How involved do you get around in the kind of the data source curation and data source governance, data cataloging? Do you kind of provision out very standard data connections, or are you kind of allowing people to hit up and create data sources however they want? So it's kind of just, I've got a load of other questions,
yeah.
But that'll be the
So
big one.
to date, we've had to let our users do it. We're too small to be too involved in that. As we're freeing up more time, that's becoming to be something on our radar that we can go and involve ourselves in. The other part is I report into our EDW BI team, and so all of our data pipelines and data pipeline project management also falls within the team, and I can tap into those about what are the new data pipelines coming, how it should be built out. We can also build out more documentation and peer review process to unify a lot of the data sources and just have it documented so that we know what extra things we could build out and save 6 data sources being refreshed and compile it into one. I think at the moment we're going to look to be playing catch up with a lot of teams and unifying their work rather than necessarily going out and pushing something. Perfect. So I just want to make sure to leave you finally with remembering to allocate the resources, build out that clear scope, get sign-off. Build your proof of concept as a minimum viable product. Work with a single use case that's going to be in production. Then iterate upon it many, many times over, bringing in more and more stakeholders as you go along. And finally, measure that success so that your non-analysts are interested in why you're spending so much time here. Thank you.